Do you think Alohomora would work for opening people's minds? So, as we draw ever closer to the release of new Harry Potter material, i.e. the next Fantastic Beasts film, I've kind of got Harry Potter on the brain a bit, so I want to talk about my house. Slytherin. I've mentioned it before. And I kind of want to talk about, just in general, my coming to terms with being Slytherin. Because it was something I kind of resisted for a bit, for a number of reasons. But let's go back. I don't know when I started. I know I was reading the books before the first movie came out, but I knew the movies were being made. So that I think there might have been a link there. Like, well, I knew there were going to be movies eventually anyway. Let me read the books. Which actually is the opposite of how I tend to think about the best way to do it now, but maybe I'll save that for another video sometime. So I had, read these, and I was pretty much at my most into them in college and the years following, which was, when they were still being released. By the time I got into the series, the first 4 books had come out. I was actually working at a bookstore when Order of the Phoenix came out. That was not fun. That was insane. And so, I was through it with all of that and followed it. So, still in the middle of all this, long before Pottermore was a thing for you to get sort of sorted officially, I used to take boy, this is going to date myself, the sort of quizzes you would see on things like LiveJournal that people would always link to for, their results. And I take those kinds of things, to find out my house or my Patronus or things like that. And I was rarely happy with the results. Now, that's not to say that I was always getting sorted into Slytherin, but in my head, especially at that point, I really thought I was a Ravenclaw. And I kept trying to force that result out of whatever quiz I was taking, and sometimes I would succeed, and if I didn't, I would just think, well, this is a badly done quiz, like you do when you're young and think that you get to dictate to the world how things are instead of the world kind of tells you. So I think part of the reason, like, I knew I was never a Gryffindor. That was never even an option for me, and I knew it wasn't. That's just not, like, fundamentally, that's not who I am. I'm not that headstrong. I'm not that, honestly, I'm not that sure of myself. I mean, even when I talk about stuff, I have my opinions and I have my feelings, but I qualify the heck out of almost everything I say. I don't deal in absolutes. I don't deal in that level of certainty very often, and that kind of is the Gryffindor stock and trade. The reason they're as brave and as bold as they are is because they're that certain of themselves. I'm not. So I always knew I was not a Gryffindor. Like, that's the thing that I am the least of anything. And, Hufflepuff, I don't think I ever had a problem with Hufflepuff, but especially as the books were coming out, I felt like I didn't really know who they were. So, like, I didn't have feelings about that. So, like, if I would take a quiz and get sorted into Hufflepuff, I honestly didn't know what to make of that. I'm like, I don't know what to do with that information. And sort of the prejudice against Slytherin came largely from the way that they are primarily depicted in the books and the movies, and I will get to that. There was sort of, in the back of my head, I thought for a very long time, like, I think I'm a Ravenclaw. Like, I can be a bit analytical, I like to pick at things a little bit, but I never felt that strongly because, I'm a little analytical, but I'm not deeply analytical. I like to sort of pick stuff enough that I know, oh, okay, I basically get it from here. Like, I don't like to deep analyze stuff. That's not where my head goes. That sort of real let's break it down to its component parts and understand everything. That's not me either. And that's also not how my head works. So eventually, when Pottermore was up, initially I ignored it. I ignored it for years. I don't think I officially sorted myself until, I don't know, it wasn't all that long ago. But the thing was, I had sort of felt myself, even before taking the current test as it exists on Pottermore and getting sorted into Slytherin, I had found myself thinking prior to that, boy, you know, Slytherin as a group really gets the short shrift in this narrative. And in the intervening years, I had softened up on the ideas of Slytherin, not just thinking of them as the bad guys. So by the time I got properly sorted, I was at a place myself with enough self-understanding and self-acceptance that I was able to look at that result and go, yeah. So what does it mean to be a Slytherin? Well, Slytherins are many things, and like, honestly, anything, they are many things that can be twisted in a bad way, but let's just talk raw qualities. We are cunning. We are pragmatic. We are end results focused. We don't act like that. We have a tendency to really carefully think about what are the outcomes of the different possible ways of handling this and what one is the best one. And then sort of where that, and we have the potential, it's not a given, but we have the potential to be very self-centered in that, because approaching things from that mindset lends itself to thinking, what's the best outcome of all these options for me? So you kind of have to have it in your head and thinking, you have to consciously, if it's not in your nature, think, okay, what's the best outcome for those involved? And we're more than capable of expanding that thought out, but you know, that is kind of a trap for Slytherins sometimes. And it's one that I used to fall into, and I was kind of in denial about that for a while, which again is one of the reasons I think I resisted the notion of being Slytherin, which was that I knew that, you know, 5-10 years ago, it was my worst tendencies that tended to play into the Slytherin elements, or at least the way those elements were part of me. They were leaning towards the way it goes bad with Slytherin. But Slytherins are also, you know, they're not quick to make friends, but they are fiercely loyal with the people who they choose to make their friends. And I do not have a particularly long list of close friends. I mean, I've got a fair number of friends. I've got a large number of acquaintances, pretty good number of friends, close friends. Like, this is somebody I call when, if everything falls apart, these are people I can reach out to and call. 3. But, you know, those people mean the world to me. And, you know, I think that's another sort of typical Slytherin trait. And you know, the books were always going to be a bit biased against Slytherin because they're from the perspective of a Gryffindor. And because Gryffindors are very much about certainty, the moral certainty of their own standing, they have a tendency and kind of an inherent distrust of people who aren't just so sure of themselves. What do you mean you have to stop and think about it? What is there to think about it? It's obviously this. And, you know, there's a reason that there's an inherent distrust on both sides. Slytherins by their nature are kind of gonna distrust somebody who is that friggin' sure of themselves without putting a ton of thought into it. And Gryffindors are gonna be cautious around anyone who seems that waffly, like doesn't have firm pillars and certainties in their life. So, you know, talking about what it's like to sort of cope with being a Slytherin, the big thing that you have to deal with, if you're a Slytherin, is pointing out, and I do in my own comments, whenever this comes up, you know, the Death Eaters. Because yes, most of the Death Eaters where we know who they were Slytherins. And most of the students at Hogwarts who maybe weren't Death Eaters directly, but had an affiliation or a desire to appeal to them, were Slytherins. So, yeah, I mean, that is a thing you have to deal with, and I'm very quick in my own comment section, if that gets brought up, to hashtag not all Slytherins. But at the same time, that's a little bit dismissive. You have to deal with your own potential worst elements. And, like, the way if you are to make Voldemort's desire for purity, basically racial purity, pure blood, if you were to make that analogous to Nazis, then Slytherin as a house is Germany. The vast majority of Nazis were German. Not all Germans were Nazis. But at the same time, you can't just go, well, that's not us, and then not deal with it. You have to, and that's kind of why I mentioned at the front end, talking about how I had to kind of come to a better understanding of myself and my own failings and potential pitfalls and bad habits, that and understand how, yeah, that could feed into the bad end of this spectrum, but you also don't have to be that. And it's one of the things that I really wish J.K. Rowling had given a little bit more knowledge of. Like in the final book, especially, like, I don't mind it so much how black and white it is, like Slytherin's bad early on, because the books are from Harry's perspective. He's 11 when the things start. He's going to see the world in pretty black and white terms. It's a little bit frustrating for me that as it goes along, as it gets to the tail end and the chips really get laid down, that it's still being dealt with in those terms. And when the Battle of Hogwarts begins, the solution is, we're going to put everyone who's in Slytherin house and lock them up. We're not even going to risk it. And again, I get it. And I'm not saying that that wasn't a viable option, but like somebody saying, you know, they're not all bad and we could use the help, and, you know, somebody going, look, we cannot risk it right now. We'll figure this out later. You know, just something. Some back and forth, because otherwise it feels like it validates the whole notion of all Slytherins are bad. And, you know, that's a little unfortunate for the last book, seeing as she was writing the characters and the work as a whole was aging with its audience. It was getting more adult. It was getting more mature. It was getting darker. It was getting more nuanced, but it was still dealing with Slytherins in very black and white terms, which was annoying. And also now at this point, going back, seeing especially the first time, it's become a joke among Potterheads. Dumbledore's tendency to go, nicely done, Slytherin, winning the House Cup. Too bad I'm giving it to Gryffindor. Like, that's a joke at this point, but it's like, dude, you... Ugh! Like, lots of people have lots of different issues with Dumbledore for various reasons, but Slytherins tend to have that one. You self-serving bastard. So, you know, what does it mean to come to terms with your own house? I think if you're not a Gryffindor and you know you're not a Gryffindor, that is something that you tend to have to do, because Gryffindor is who we see the most of in the books and the movies. And it is nice that we are now getting, say, a really good Hufflepuff representative in the form of Newt Scamander in the Fantastic Beasts films. And as far as Ravenclaw goes, we do have Luna, who, I mean, Luna's weird enough that I feel like maybe there should be a slightly less crazy representative for Ravenclaws as well, but, you know, I think she also kind of gives you the ballpark, you know, that sort of way of looking at things. But with Slytherin, like, the best we've had as an attempt as a curative to try and fix the Slytherin image is the Cursed Child, and the Cursed Child... Oh, I gotta talk about that at some point, but that would be a whole other video. It's... Yeah, I'm not going to talk about that thing. It's a divisive piece of work, and a lot of fans just basically ignore it. So to have that kind of be the major, see, Slytherins aren't all that bad piece of work, and nobody likes it, not because of that, but because of other stuff, that doesn't help. But, you know, I take pride in my house. I take pride in the qualities that I have, because I have these qualities. I I will look at outcomes more than I will look at what's the principled best thing. And that's not to say I don't have principles, but I can't stop my brain from going, forget what's the quote-unquote proper thing to do. What's the real-world consequence of X, Y, Z? And whether or not I choose to override that and go on a principled stance or not, I can't stop my brain from, at the very least, running that calculation. And that's a pretty dang Slytherin thing to do. And I have really come to embrace it. I mean, look at this. I've got the tie. I've got this. There we go. I've got a pin. I've got a winter hat. Haven't got a scarf yet. I got to get one. See that? This is what I'm talking about. And as long as, you know, I have to remember not to get too overly snippy with people when they're like, wait, so you support Voldemort? No, I don't. Because that is the worst end. That is the worst of what we are capable of. And I think that you could very easily, in future works related to Harry Potter, if it was chosen to do so, you could very easily have the worst possible version of any of the houses be a villain. I think you could have a worst possible version of a Gryffindor. Well, I mean, arguably maybe we saw that with Wormtail, but I don't know. His qualities don't really line up all that well. But I mean, like, somebody who is so absolutely sure of themselves that they are in the right and don't stop and question that, that works as long as they are, in fact, on the right side of things. If they're not, that's scary. With Ravenclaw, the worst possible version is someone who's just interested in the data, in the analyzing, and has no interest in the human outcome, on the human impact. Worst possible version of Hufflepuff is actually probably still really cool, because Hufflepuffs are kind of awesome and adorable, and I love them to death. So, like, okay, maybe they're fine, but pretty much the rest of us, you take any of us, you push it to the extreme worst end of these qualities, you're going to get a horrible person. And in the case of Slytherin, yeah, that's Voldemort. But that's not who we are. We're not all the worst version of ourselves. And I like to think, especially over the last few years, that I have become a much better version of myself than I've been in the past, and I hope to continue improving. And I don't think I'm doing that in spite of or working against my Slytherin qualities. I think I'm doing that to take best advantage of these traits, of these elements of myself that have tripped me up before, but if I can redirect them and keep my eye on, you know, on traps that I've fallen into before, I can keep changing, I can keep improving, I can keep evolving. And I think all of us can. Be the best version of your house, whatever that happens to be. Again, if you're Hufflepuff, you're probably fine wherever you land. So that's my ramble with no real firm conclusion, because I didn't figure out an end point before I started. So it'll just kind of peter out there. So what are your thoughts on all of this? What's your house in Hogwarts? You know, what are your feelings in general? Keep them respectful. Even if you're like joking and you're like, oh, it's just ironic, if you're going like, Gryffindor sucks, Slytherin sucks, like, I'm gonna delete those comments. Like, that's the nature of the discourse right now. I can't tell the difference between you doing that as a joke and you doing that for real, so I'm just gonna kill it. So don't do that, but short of that, whatever your thoughts are, whatever your house is, whatever you wanna say, drop it down in the comments, let's talk about it. Whole bunch of stuff you can do, because there's buttons and there's links, including one to my Patreon. If you like what I'm doing, you want to help support me and this channel in that way. But if you don't worry about it. There's other links to check out as well. If you don't want to check out any of them, don't sweat it, because at the end of the day, you're the council. I just run the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.